Good morning. It is Thursday, February 27th, and this is the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting for 9:30 a.m. start. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being here and acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. So we have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? The amended agenda, sorry, yes, the amended agenda, this one, which has a letter attached to it. It was given out this morning. Everybody's got that? Okay. Any other additions or deletions to that? So motion to adopt the amended agenda as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. So first let's receive all the reports on communications. Yes, that communication is what was added. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So item number 2, Annex A, pages 1 through 21. Youth appointments. Hang on, let me get to the actual agenda or part. And then did staff want to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that the purpose of the report is to legislatively open space for potential youth involvement on SCRD advisory committees, and staff are also seeking support to further explore youth engagement opportunities with the school district as well as the district student leadership team.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it to directors. Let you weigh in here. Who'd like to say what? Anything? Director Pratt, go ahead.
I'll start. Number one, I'm thrilled to be able to have this initiative come forward with opening up youth appointments. Youth voice is really important. They are the future taxpayers and citizenry that will be making these decisions. So I believe that it's really important to hear what they have to say when it comes to planning and future planning and initiatives that we're doing. So I'm super excited to see this come through. My previous iteration as an elected official was as a school board trustee, and having a youth voice at the table changes the conversation and gives you a broader voice of experience about what's actually happening on the ground and what it means in the lives of the citizenry. So it's an exciting initiative, and I'm glad to see this come through. So thank you to staff.
Thank you. Director Kroll.
I sort of concur with Director Pratt, but just wanted to add from in the town of Gibsons, we have the Students on Council, and it's been an incredibly eye-opening experience to a great extent. In the selection method for them, we asked them to submit basically a CV and a cover letter. And the caliber of students that we received applications from was overwhelming. Like, you tend to separate yourself from the education system to a certain degree, but to realize the level that these students are operating at is really an eye-opener. I think the directors who attended the science fair sort of experienced the same thing. It's like, oh my God, this is the level of stuff that they're dealing with. Something that we did in our first year, because of the caliber of the people we got, we accepted 2 students from grade 12 for the first year on council. And it was a bit of a detriment in so much as when they left, when they graduated, we lost the students. It was just sort of the door shut. And in our original plan, it was to have a grade 12 and a grade 11 student. So the grade 11 student would ultimately fill the council seat. So there would be some continuity between the 2 people. And I think this is sort of a valid thing, that you don't lose the continuity of every time, the school year ends, you lose both your representatives. So that's just all I really wanted to add.
Sorry, question for you. Does the town of Gibsons, are they a voting member on the town of Gibsons?
No, they're not, because they weren't elected. They were appointed. They are able to sit on any committees that they want to sit on. It sort of works for well, we have a bit of a problem because the committee of the whole meetings, which are usually in the afternoon, it's difficult for them to attend even though they do start at 3. Occasionally we have, the student member comes screaming in at, 2 minutes past 3, but, they're welcome to attend. It's a little more difficult for them to attend. The evening council meetings aren't a problem for them. And, feedback we've had from them, they've really enjoyed, I know Jason and Sasha last year, some of the things, it was quite an eye-opener for them, just some of the things that they were allowed to participate in and were included in. It was empowering. Our big hope was that they were going back to the school and sharing what they were getting. That's also bringing stuff from the school to us. But no, they didn't get to vote.
Okay. Wow. Look over here. Everybody's got their hand up. Start at the end. Director Lee, Director McMahon, and then Director Tice.
I was wondering why we didn't include them in our APC committees. It probably is even easier for local students to participate at that level.
Thank you, Chair. At the time the recommendation was made, our understanding was that we would take advisory committees as a first step. So my understanding of the resolution was to explore that on an advisory committee level.
Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, actually our APCs are an advisory committee rather than, because they don't work with us as a whole. They advise the directors, so.
And we could request that be changed.
Yeah, I was just wondering what everybody else thought about that part.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Well, I'm going to answer Director Lee first. I actually kicked that around with Jason, former Gibson's counselor. APCs are a bit abstruse. It's not a very accessible place, I think, for students to start in understanding local government, but it probably depends on which APC and what they're doing. And if they were interested, I think that would be fine. No complaints about that. I had a lengthy conversation with Raquel Koloff, who submitted the letter here, and I think she raises a lot of valid concerns about making a student a voting member of an advisory committee, because these particular committees are subject matter committees where we are looking for subject matter experts to advise us, and by virtue of their youth, the youth are almost certainly not subject matter experts in this area. So it's probably not appropriate for them to be voting or for us to be asking them to make decisions on matters that they don't know very much about. In any event, I certainly wouldn't want to put voting youth on advisory committees without asking our advisory committees what they think first. We rely on their advice, so perhaps we should rely on their advice there too. I think we have some unique challenges in terms of timing around our activities, but and the advisory committees are fine if the youth want to get on them, but you don't get a very broad view of local government as you would at some of our other types of meetings where they deal with a much wider range of activities and issues. Our advisory committees are very narrow because that's what they're for. And they assume that the people on them already know quite a bit about the subject before arriving at the committee, so they're not necessarily the best place to get an education on the subject either. So I do have some not misgivings, but I probably am not prepared to make youth voting members on committees at this point.
Director Tice?
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo what Director McMahon just said. I think, especially in the Agricultural and the Natural Resources Committee, we're looking for experienced professionals that can advise us in matters that we're not experts in. And, things that are a little bit more forward-looking, potentially a future PMAC when we're starting to look at solid waste solutions. I think there may be a time and a place for a youth voice. But as long as the PMAC committee is in favor of actually allowing that, I think that should be run past the committee. And if we were to have such a thing as, say, Actions on Climate Change Committee, I think that's where that voice is crucial. But I think on matters where we're looking for subject matter experts, I think having them as voting members is not necessarily something that we should be looking at right now. I know it will be an educational experience, but I think even a non-voting member can have can raise their arguments and convince the rest of the committee to vote in their favor. I don't think you need to be a voting member to do that.
Director Lee?
I was just wondering what that word that Donna used meant. I'm going to look it up now.
Director Kroll, and then go to Sherry.
One of the things that we brought in was if the student is on a committee, their vote would not break a tie. So they're allowed to vote, but if it gets into a situation of a tie, their vote can't be the vote that would sway the tie.
Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to provide some clarification from a legislative perspective that advisory committees don't have any authority to bind the regional district in any way. They make non-binding recommendations for the board to consider in their decision-making process, and so they're not an elected body. And also that other local governments, Saanich in particular I'm thinking of, so they started with appointing their youth as non-voting members, but they're now moving to a different model. So a lot of local governments out there are adopting a more participatory model.
Director McMahon, and then Director Hiltz, and Director McMahon.
I guess I'm more on the thrill side to this proposal, and I did support at the UBCM convention to support 16-year-olds to vote. So to be consistent with my voting there, I think I would be voting here to have them to be voting if I think they can vote at a municipal election. And I think the youth are citizens, and these are citizens advisory committees, and they do serve at the pleasure of the board. So I think the board, essentially, as the CEO mentioned, we have the ultimate authority. Is there a risk? Yeah, maybe there's a slight risk. I'm willing to take the risk. For me, I think the difficulty is how to allow them to participate. And at the LGLA, the inclusive decision-making, that is the key, is how do you find people whose voices you're not hearing and get them to participate? And for me, this is the opening offer. The logistics, I don't know how could you have a member of the, how students can get access to these things when we're having difficulty getting adults to them. So that's ultimately my concern, is how do we actually facilitate their voices are heard? And no, 5-year-old might be a little bit low, 12 maybe a little bit low. 16 is definitely in the ballpark, and yeah, I'd like to see them as best we could.
Director McMahon?
I would be happy to support putting them on or offering them the opportunity to sit on committees as non-voting representatives, and then seeing how that works out, and revisiting this, a year from now or more. But with, as I said before, without consulting the committees, I kind of got some feedback that committee members would feel offended, and I hope that's not the case. But I think we need to step carefully, because we need to respect our advisory committees.
Okay, I'm going to weigh in here. On page 1, we actually have the resolution that we adopted in November, where we requested a report addressing options for appointing them to advisory committees, and that we contact SD 46 to make a delegation request with the district student leadership team to offer a presentation and obtain feedback on how they would like to become involved with local government on the Sunshine Coast. And I don't believe that's happened. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was in contact with the school district, and they actually suggested kind of a different approach, that we attend the next district student leadership team meeting and have that conversation and hear from them there. So that potentially could be a next step.
Right. So I'm wondering if actually setting up, like making these changes at this point might be premature. We haven't actually asked them if they want to come. So one of the steps I've heard in engaging with youth is find out how they want to participate. We're assuming they want to be on our advisory committee meetings. You know, come to these boards. Maybe they don't want to. So I think I would personally like to see us wait on this piece until we've actually had that conversation and engaged with them to see how they want to come and play in our arena. Director Mann?
I would fully support that. The other thing that concerns me a little is timing, because our appointment systems work on the calendar year and not the school year. So if to get the most value out of the experience, it might be sensible to start looking for students in the spring so that they're ready to sit on the committees in the fall. But anyway, that's just a question that we can explore.
Okay, how would we like to proceed? Director Lee?
First of all, I'm in favor of your motion to ask them how they'd like to participate. But I did want to make the comment that I've been working with the students in the ages of 15 to 18 in our information booth, and they're more responsible than a lot of the adults I work with. So I'm not at all scared to have them on the committee.
All right, how would we like to proceed here? Director Pratt, Director Ties.
I had a green blinking light. Oh, you're muting me again, are you? It's funny because my comment is always like my children are more mature than their mother is. So, but they're 18, 19, and 24 now, and they're very, very vocal, and they've been raised in a household to speak their voice and be involved. So, I'm hearing from the board that there is support, but we need to go to the students and hear where they want to, what's most meaningful for them. And then I would also like to say that Ailish McKenzie, one of the youth counselors from the town of Gibsons, has reached out with another proposal, which is really interesting. She'll be coming to a future committee meeting to discuss her ideas on youth council for the Sunshine Coast, which is another option. But what I would like to suggest and move is that we reach out to the district student leadership team and for that presentation and find with these proposed options, and that the recommendations maybe just be deferred for this at this point in time.
That's okay. I think, Tara, you have something for that? And then we'll see if somebody will second it.
And that the School District 46 Sunshine District Student Leadership Team, be consulted to obtain feedback on youth becoming involved with local government on the Sunshine Coast.
Okay, so this is a motion for deferral, so there's no debate. All those in favor? Thank you. And Director Ties.
Yeah, I would like to point out the last recommendation, and further that staff continue to collaborate with school district number 46 to develop outreach process to recruit, encourage, and facilitate youth involvement. I'd like to make that motion.
Okay, did you want to have as well the piece about the advisory committees, or take that out and just youth involvement in SCRD, with the SCRD maybe?
Yeah, with the SCRD, and then maybe take out the advisory committees, yeah.
On an ongoing basis, including implementation plan to address potential barriers. Okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues that has been brought up is them actually getting here for meetings, particularly in the evening. Yeah. Okay. Seconded? Second? Okay. Director McMahon?
I'm also wondering about public consultations. Like, we're about to have asked for feedback from the public on our website. If there's some way to communicate that with the school district, that would be kind of interesting to get, because that's a public feedback thing. And we quite often have, I don't think short-term rentals is particularly relevant, but there are other topics that we engage the community about where youth may be interested. And if there is some way to get the information out there through the schools that the opportunity is open, that would be great.
Director Pratt?
The other piece is the tagging on policing, transportation, and area planning commission onto that as well. So I'd like to make that as an amendment. To add on to the terms of reference. I'll just make that as a comment that, and then rather than, because transportation and policing would be directly related, youth would be directly interested in that. Area Planning Commission, I think, because they talk so much about future planning and current planning that's going on within their local community and their neighborhood, I think those can be of quite interest to young up-and-comers.
Director Ties?
I also think that as we're heading into a regional growth strategy, that it would be absolutely crucial to have these voices at the table. So I think there are ways to engage, and maybe the advisory committees aren't the optimal way. I think there are some big potentials, things like OCP rewrites and regional growth strategies are certainly a big part of what we are looking for with the youth voice, I think.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion on the floor? Director Hills?
I don't think it's a comment. It's not a comment on the motion, no.
Okay, so let's vote on the motion that's on the floor. Is everybody clear what's on the floor? Would you like to read it, Tara?
Thank you, Chair. From what I understand, it was, and that staff continued to collaborate with School District 46 to develop an outreach process to recruit, encourage, and facilitate youth involvement, including implementation plan to address potential barriers to youth participation.
Okay, we have to add on there with the SCRD. Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. Director Hiltz, did you want to comment now?
The comment, I'm going back to when we had a intergovernmental meeting at the public market, and the school district presented a Zoom video conference of the youth. And I think the youth are kind of driving the different ways to interact. And, do they actually have to be here, or could they have their set up in Elphinstone and Zoom in to the meeting, that they don't have to be here, and they can have a whole group of students watching? So I'm trying to think of outside of these physical walls, and this, from what my interaction with youth is, they don't think of physical walls. They think of the thing in their hand. They think of where they are, not where they need to be. That's just what and for me, it seems like the corporation is kind of always about the walls, about meeting at this table, and this distance issue is coming up with advisory planning commissions. We're having someone who lives on Gambier dialing in just to listen in. Our alternate director is looking at being able to do that. So I think the youth are going to probably drive how they want to communicate. So yeah, I'm in favor of them listening and facilitate them not physically having to be here. So I think they're going to. I just go back to that Zoom conference, and I thought that was amazing to see all those people in one place and all having that discussion. I thought that was terrific. I was just really blown away by it. Yeah.
As I've mentioned before, my office in Calgary, we use Zoom every week. We've been using it for probably a year and a half because we have 90 people in our company, and they're all over Canada. And we also bring in the lenders and such too. And it's phenomenal. We've been doing it now in Sechelt. Since the beginning of the year, we've been using Zoom. Before that, we're using GoToMeeting, but we're using Zoom. And we had a budget meeting yesterday. It was 5.5 hours, and one of our counselors is not here. He was in on the meeting the whole time. So it has that capability. We can bring them in from wherever. So potentially we could tie this into even curriculums for them or whatever that they're dealing with, depending on how we'd want to set it up. Okay. All right, let's move on to Annex B, pages 22 to 32. This is coming to the regional district from the District of Sechelt. I'll maybe speak to this since it's coming from us. Is that okay? So the District of Sechelt, two of our counselors actually, Brenda Rowe and Janice Kuster, attended a session at UBCM where they talked about poverty reduction planning and an action program. So the provincial government has come up with two streams of funding. One is to put together an action plan, and then following the action plan, there is a stream of funding that you can apply to address some of the issues identified and some of the actions that could be taken. So this is the first piece, to look at putting together a plan for the Sunshine Coast. As we know, we've been talking about it lots here, boundaries are not necessarily known by members on the Sunshine Coast, so poverty goes back and forth and they access services everywhere. So we're looking to take the lead. We already have a letter from the town of Gibsons, thank you. We have letters of support from Community Services and Jeff McKee from Vancouver Coastal Health. And we are waiting the letter from the Sechelt Nation. So if the regional district comes on board, it raises the amount of money that we can get from $25,000 to $150,000, which would allow us to hire consulting staff to build on the work that was done actually by the Community Services a couple of years ago when they held the sessions in Roberts Creek, right? So we're building on that to take that forward. So our Director of Financial Services has submitted a request for a letter of support from the regional district. Director Pratt and then Director Tice.
Okay, perfect. So I'll move the recommendations with the Team Sunshine Coast approach.
So, and Director Tice, you're seconding that then? Any questions, comments? Director Hiltz.
Just the in-kind services, any estimate of what, I assume it's within the existing budget, is any estimate of what the in-kind services would require?
I'm going to have to look to staff for that piece.
Thank you for the question, Chair. At this time, no, we don't have an estimate, and it's noted in the letter from the district that a plan and a detailed scope would be one of the next steps, and so staff would be looking to accommodate the request within existing resources. Thanks.
Okay. Director McMahon?
I just thought I'd jump in and point out the obvious, that what people in poverty need is money, and that's not on the table. It's actually the province that sets the welfare and disability rates and the housing allowance, all of which are completely inadequate for anybody to survive on. So there's a certain level of irony involved in this. When I read through the package, I noticed on page 28 that they had 4 key priorities that were mental health and addictions, food security, transportation, and access to health care. And I thought all 4 of those are directly relevant to our community. So that's good, and hopefully we could maybe take some action in that area. I also noted that the guidelines allow for us to pay honoraria to community members that are direct participants in funded activities and who are living in poverty. So I think that that's really good, and I hope you could find some people to participate, because I'd much rather, well, first off, they know the situation, they're living it, but also, I'd feel better to spend the money on those directly affected than paying more consultants. Just my comments.
Okay, thank you. Director Kroll?
Further to what Director McMahon was saying, the accessibility seminar that we had one in Gibsons, and I also attended the one in Sechelt, and it was a classic example of how the people are affected participating in the solution is really important. So certainly agree with Director McMahon.
Don't see any other comments. All those in favor? Thank you. Move on to number 4, Annex C, pages 33 to 107. And this has been received. So was there anything you wanted to address with this, GM Hall? No? Any questions from the board? Director Ties.
I do want to make a comment on especially the off-ice users, and I personally like the idea of an outdoor mixed-use arena that offers sort of lacrosse, floor hockey, roller derby, basketball, pickleball, all those kind of opportunities. And I think with sponsorship from local businesses like Concrete Ones, this could be achieved at a relatively low price. But and I'm thinking somewhere around Brothers Park, Gibson's, GAC, somewhere around there. But that being said, here we are already spending 40% of our property taxes on recreation, and this will not make things cheaper. So I like the idea, but it's certainly not it's just more on everybody's desk, and so I think it's something to keep in mind for the future.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Director Ties? My question is, when will GAC transfer to Zone 3 in Gibsons? When's that transfer happening? And that might change availability of August ice, for example, and things like that, because we might be able to put in ice earlier if we're not on stage 4 because we're on the aquifer. Any idea?
The thing that's currently holding us up is the provincial water license. So the well is there. We're awaiting the license on it, and until we get that, there's certain infrastructure things that are proceeding, sort of in anticipation of the license, but it's the license that's the fly in the ointment at the moment.
Any other questions? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm on why is it on the agenda? And I guess what I understand is that the way the current motion about ice allocation is that the board has voted to essentially run a $15,000 deficit. Is that kind of what our previous resolution has been about moving ice to the end of May, is if they don't make up the surplus, it will be made up by taxation. That's essentially what is being brought out of this report, is the significance, financial impact of the user groups not being able to cover the variable costs. And that's why it's here?
I think we requested a report, right? And we don't know what the shortfall will be at this point yet. Did you want to address any of that?
You're correct, Chair. So this is here because at the last Planning and Community Development Committee meeting, the committee requested some information about the basis of variable costs and how they're calculated out and how they're applied, how some of the numbers that were referenced by that delegation came to be. And yes, you're also correct that there's, as is the director, that there's a financial risk of an operating deficit here. At this point, we don't know how much it will be, and the direction that staff took from the resolution that was made at the last committee meeting was to work with user groups to try to minimize that as much as we can in the 8 weeks about until that May period begins. Thank you.
Director McMahon?
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't think the board should be making decisions about allocating ice time. So I'm hoping that better processes will be in place going forward. I've been told it is not appropriate to ask the roller derby girls to fight it out with the ice hockey players. So perhaps another process.
I'm visual, right? So when you say things like that, like I have these pictures in my head, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. All right. No further questions. Let's move to Annex D. This is pages 108 to 110. Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, applications for 3 grants. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Trite.
Thank you. So we have 3 separate grants that we're applying for, all related to emergency management. They're coming up. The first one we've already submitted, the one for ESS, it was due in February. We have another one that's going to be submitted mid-March and another one in April. So we put all 3 of these on the single board resolution, just for a matter of efficiency. The board resolutions can follow, so the fact we've submitted an application is not an issue for the first one because the CEPF allows the resolutions to follow from the board.
All right, any questions by the board? Director McMahon?
Well, I'm happy to move the recommendations on page 108 because emergency preparedness is really important and getting money from anybody is great. There is a real high level of interest in the community, especially around evacuation route planning. And that one interests me a lot as to where we'll go because it's we need a regional plan, but also by neighborhood because we have a lot of very isolated areas.
I'll look for a seconder for that. Seconded? Okay. And then I have a couple of questions. I noticed in the last recommendation regarding the evacuation route planning, it says focused on water evacuation. Is we just focusing on water evacuation or is it part of a bigger picture?
So for this particular grant, we have an evacuation plan in draft form. During my research into this, I was able to come across. It's not a plan that specifically identifies specific geographic regions. It's a plan that is designed that you can apply it to any specific area, with the idea being that you can't anticipate where exactly an evacuation area will be. So we wouldn't do an evacuation plan, for example, say for Gibsons, because when it's time to evacuate, it may not be all of Gibsons. It may be a portion of that or a portion of Gibsons and a portion of electoral area E, for example. So the idea behind this evacuation plan that we have in draft is that when you find out where the evacuation area is, you can apply this sort of generic plan to that and develop and go from there. I think you're correct, though, in saying that these different little communities are going to have specific needs, and this other evacuation plan we have could be applied to each of those little kind of communities or geographic areas with their unique needs.
Okay, so I actually got an email early this morning from one of my counselors who's away who pointed out this stream to me, and I've been aware of this, and we've been talking about it in Seashout. And this was prior to you coming, because we were talking about applying for this for Seashout. given that, we also have to have our own evacuation planning done. If the regional district applies for it, could Seashelt also apply for it, or would it be counterproductive, or would it minimize the possibility of the regional district getting this grant?
No, I don't believe it'll minimize it. In the past, we've applied for grants. For example, when we applied for the CWPP grant, that one Seashelt could not apply for independently because basically we combined that application with the town of Gibson's, the Seashelt Indian Band, the SCRD, and so on. And that negates the possibility of another jurisdiction applying separately. That we did not do that for these applications, so I would assume that Seashelt would be able to apply for its own grant.
So if we applied and also got those funds, then it would be more that we could all have access to. Did you want to address that, Tina?
I think one of the comments out of the review that was done for emergency planning was, as far as how all the jurisdictions interrelate with one another. So just to highlight that Seashelt is part of Sunshine Coast Emergency Planning. And so, an integrated approach and making sure we share that information, I think, would be of value. So making sure that if we're designing something that is integrated.
No, I agree. I guess where I'm coming from is last year I attended the Mayor's Caucus up in Prince George, and they had a number of the mayors from the interior there who had they were affected by the forest fires. And what they found is that even though the region had a plan, it wasn't necessarily down at the granular level where they needed it. And so they needed more information. And so what their recommendation was, yes, have the big plan, but also have your individual smaller plans as well, so that you know at a detailed level how you fit into that. Because depending on what the circumstance is, we may not be able to call on the regional district for resources. So we may need to have some more of that expertise locally. So it was more building on. So I would see definitely they'd have to dovetail. We have to. But it's also providing further information at the local level. Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm following up on the route. The relationship. I was pointed out to me, like on the upper levels highways, there's these disaster route signs, and I was told that I always thought that that's the way I would go in a disaster, and then I was told, no, that's where you cannot go. That's where the emergency vehicles are going to be going. So, basic misunderstanding. So I'm wondering how this works together, and is this an internal document? Will it be? Is it an internal document, and is there anything that would go out to the public in terms of that we have one of these things, or to get rid of that misunderstanding of the disaster route versus an evacuation route? And it was something I learned.
You're not the only one to do that. We had that discussion at a conference I was at, and that's shared by many people. They believe that is an evacuation route, when in fact it's supposed to be a disaster response route. In reality, I don't think it's going to matter, to be honest. If people need to evacuate, and that's the one way they can evacuate, they're going to evacuate regardless of what the signs say. So, I mean, that's a common issue. As far as the evacuation itself, so the reason I wanted to focus on a water evacuation, it's something fairly new, and since we already have the other plan in at least in a draft form, I just felt the resource would be better used to go for the water evacuation. We can continue to use the draft form to work out these evacuations on the smaller scale. It's not something the SCRD is going to be able to do. We won't have the resources to go around to every little community and to develop a plan for Irvin's Landing, for this, for that, for this, for that. It would just be very time-consuming to do that. We could provide the resource to local associations or community groups that they could then work out the on-the-ground details for that kind of planning.
So a follow-up is, after this happens, there will be some kind of a document that the emergency planners will use. Is that what is going to be the end product?
That's correct. That's this evacuation plan that we have in draft form. That's the intent of it. It is basically a template or a guide that could be used in all sorts of different geographic areas to put together a plan.
Director Lee?
Two questions. Well, one observation and one question. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he says, do you know that my boat's part of an emergency evacuation plan by water? And he lives in Garden Bay. So at one point there was such a plan. I don't know where it is, but I do know there was such a plan. My second question is, while you're doing this, is it be done through the fire departments, or in other words, is Pender Harbour going to be involved in the planning?
Yes, the evacuation is a role of the emergency program, so it covers the entire Sunshine Coast regardless of the fire protection areas.
The reason I'm asking is probably there's enough boat station in Pender Harbour to evacuate the Sunshine Coast, so you're missing quite a resource if you don't check her out.
Any other questions or comments? Director Hills?
I appreciate, the focus on water is I think it's well known, that the Langdale ferry terminal is built on fill, right? Most of it is on fill, and it might not be the appropriate exit route. So yeah, I'm looking, the other options to leave the coast by water, I think are very much appreciated.
All right, seeing no further questions, we have a motion on the floor as on page, whatever page this is, 108. All those in favor? Yeah, 3 motions, all of them, as one. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it indicated that we needed 3 separate recommendations. We do not need 3 separate recommendations. All right. Item number 6. Thank you, Mr. Trite. And this one I'll turn over to GM Hall, I believe.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. Staff heard at last week's Infrastructure Services Committee meeting that the committee would like an update on naming and signage related to the Sechelt First Nation. And so verbally I can offer an update to say that correspondence from the province requesting feedback on renaming of Madeira Park and Wilson Creek has been received by the Regional District and is planned to be on the March 12th Planning and Community Development Committee agenda as correspondence. And staff have begun work on a staff report and will be referring the matter to advisory planning commissions in Area A and D, with the idea that a staff report will then be on an April agenda before the deadline for feedback that the province has established. And so the committee can look forward to the correspondence in March and then a staff report which includes comments from advisory groups in April. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee?
How will you determine which advisory groups to contact? And for Pender Harbour, I was thinking we have a residents association, we have a chamber, and we have an APC. It would seem like that's probably the groups you would ask to comment, is my thoughts on it. So.
Good.
Thank you for the question. Our standard referral is to the Advisory Planning Commission. And so those members may wish to reach out to other groups, and I believe that if other groups have input they would like to share to the province seems open to that. Thank you.
Director Todd? Director Ty?
I'm concerned about the timing, given that Modi says that all the signage is going to be done and the project is going to be done by the end of March. So staff reports in April aren't going to be of particular value.
I think there's 2 things that have happened here. One is we have received a letter with regards to the changing the names for the 3 communities, Wilson Creek, Sultry Bay, and Madeira Park, I believe the 3 are. And there has been no correspondence currently, as far as I know, about changing highway signs.
Staff would confirm that no correspondence has been received on highway signage. And further, the highway signage is a Ministry of Transportation responsibility and was not part of the scope of what was requested in the referral that came from the province, which just related to name change, not how it's implemented or communicated. Thank you.
Director Lee?
I have in front of me a letter dated January 9th, 2020 to the Sunshine Coast Regional District. As a result, this the third paragraph down, as a result of this work, the Minister replacing existing destination distance guidance signs G006 and service and attraction signs along the corridor with dual language versions. And it ends up with Modi is working towards having the new signage installed in spring, summer 2020. If you have any question about the proposed works, please contact me at telephone number, and it's Lena Farmer at government.bc.ca. I would take that they were asking for comments from us. So
Was that on the agenda, or where is that letter?
I just have it. I'm not sure where I got it. Here it is. I think it was on an agenda package.
What would you like us to do with this letter that Director Lee found?
Yes, in the interest of making sure that everybody's working from the same information, if we could just make sure that that is the same letter that was sent to staff, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I do have both letters. The other one is the one about the name change as well.
So you'll forward that letter to staff and to the rest of the directors? The one on
sure.
Okay.
I'll give it both. And
I think we have a copy of the one.
Yes. I have further comments though,
yes,
too.
Go ahead.
I also went back in some meetings we have attended, and as part of the foundation agreement, there is a table called Public, Local Government, and Stakeholder Engagement under the foundation agreement. My thoughts is if we had that table, that would be probably the appropriate place for discussions, but I don't think that table exists yet. So my thoughts on the whole thing, are we a little bit early on all this stuff?
Director Pratt?
I'm just going to tag on to the letter that Director Lee read. I forwarded it to all directors on Thursday, January 9th, as well as to Tracy, Dean, and Mark, so the CAOs. So it's been forwarded to everybody already. I don't know if it actually hit an agenda package. I haven't done the search yet, but this is on the dual language highway signs.
So what are we looking for? Are we looking for staff to follow up on this? Is this for information? What would we like to do? Because it sounds like end of March is what it indicates. Feedback? I don't know. Okay, Director Tides.
I just have a comment. And when I saw the news release on the highway signs, I was a little bit disappointed that it seems that the Squamish Nation hasn't had their input on highway signage. It seems like everything. I think it's great that the Sechelt Nation has had their input, but it'd be great to have this coast-wide and have the Squamish Nation involved as well. And I know that there are some members on council there that are very much into the renaming, and so I'm just wondering where the communication breakdown happened between Moti and Squamish Nation, but I'd like to see the whole coast have the same treatment. But that's just a comment from me. Of course, it's a little bit difficult in Roberts Creek because I live in Stalchaya, and western Roberts Creek is Wasam. So there's two nations, one place. So makes it a little bit more difficult.
Director Lee.
I was going to reserve my comments on the signage, but I will make them anyways. I'm all in favor of dual naming, but I'd like to see a common standard. These signs are for travelers, not for us. And travelers don't just travel on the coast. They Squamish and from Vancouver and from everywhere. And it would be so nice to see a common standard naming on all highways in BC. And I would be very happy to see dual language signs on the Sunshine Coast, but to a common standard, so we're the same as every place else. So I'm thinking without consultation, you're going to end up with something like fragmented signage and not a common standard. And I think we need to be careful that we do get a common standard. I don't know if there is one or not. I guess I was hoping staff could tell me that part.
All right, I'm going to jump in and make a recommendation that we request staff set up a meeting with Ministry of Transport, our representative, Michael Braun, I guess his name is, the Sechelt Council, and staff, applicable staff there, as well as our board and staff, as soon as possible so that we can respond to the provincial letter with regards to highway signage and other signage on the Sunshine Coast. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded? Any comments? Director Crow?
You mentioned the Sechelt Nation, and we should probably include the Squamish.
Is this letter to do with, is it Sechelt with regards to the foundation? It might only be with regards to the foundation and Sechelt territory at this point. Okay. Any other questions, comments? All those in, okay, Director Hiltz.
Just the timing between staff is bringing something in the March 12th and how the timing of these pieces would intersect.
Good question. Staff?
I think at this point we have to gather the information, and based on this particular motion, I would recommend that it be forwarded to the board meeting today so staff can enact on it, because it does seem like a time of the essence is important. And so we gather up the information and see how we can synthesize something for the board.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All those in, Director Mann?
Do we need to amend your motion to refer it to the
Yes.
board this afternoon? Have we done that?
No. Moved, seconded. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Okay, all those in favor of the amended motion? Thank you. All right. Let's move to the communications. It's been received, and I think we incorporated the comments into our discussion on the topic. So nothing further from that. So I'd look for any new business from staff. No new business. So I'd look for a motion to move in camera under sections 91K of the community charter. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And I'll turn to the media. Any questions? Yeah.
We have so much of it today. I've somehow become nomenclature correspondent.
Yes. All right. Any questions?
Yes, I do have one, please.
Okay.
Could we get a copy of the January 9th letter, seeing as it never made it onto the agenda and everyone else has seen it?
Is it a public? It's probably a public letter. Haven't seen it. We haven't seen that. What is the letter?
I just forwarded it to everybody.
Okay.
And so did Len.
Okay.
And it's publicly, we discuss it in an open meeting. So.
Yes.
And there's an email to board, so it should be.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. We'll get it to you. Yeah, there's no issues. All right. Any other questions? All right. So we will let you take your leave, and we'll move in camera.
The statistics are quite shocking when you find how many people do die from the flus we already are having around. So it's actually just one more. I am concerned how we keep the water going, for instance, but I don't. The people we have running that are the ones that are best able to fight off that in a very short fashion, I believe. So I support that we get the doctor in here to make sure that we have the right information.
I think what I'm hearing and the stuff I'm reading is, yes, it is like another flu, but because of the number of people that come down with it, there are issues with regards to keeping required services actually operating. And so how do we put a process in place to ensure that the required, the water is running and the sewer is being taken care of and all of those kinds of things. So he can probably give us some perspective. Director Pratt.
I would also like to make the amendment that it would go to board this afternoon, just because it is just because of the timely nature of it.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. And then Director Hiltz.
I just keep hearing the offer from the Sunshine Coast Regional Hospital District people that we have. So the relationship between Jeff McKee and them, that they keep saying they're a resource. So can we invite them? I'm not sure if that's and also an invite to. I'm not sure if it's the same people speaking, but they've just said, hey, ask us. So I'm wondering if this is a time to ask the like Jerry Latham as well to speak with us.
Tina?
So they're colleagues. They work within the same organization. So I would recommend that we bring the health officer to a committee of the regional district, because the regional hospital district board is a different mandate. But most certainly start there and see where we can take it from there.
All right. All those in favor of the motion? Moved. Second. All in favor. Anything else on the agenda? Motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff.